The cranberry sauce sat untouched as my mother Patricia raised her wine glass above our crowded Thanksgiving table. 23 family members had gathered in our childhood dining room conversations, buzzing until she commanded attention with that familiar theatrical clearing of her throat. Uncle Marcus paused mid-sentence about his law practice expansion. Cousin Jenny stopped cutting turkey for her toddler. Even Aunt Sarah lowered her gossip-laden whisper. Patricia's eyes gleamed with anticipation as she surveyed her captive audience, then locked onto me with predatory satisfaction. "Look at this table," she announced, voice dripping with manufactured disappointment. "Doctors, lawyers, business owners, successful people, building real futures." Her pause stretched uncomfortably long before delivering the crushing finale. "How does it feel to be useless, son?" The room fell dead silent. I looked at her calmly and replied, "Feels great since I just stopped paying your rent." Her confident smile vanished instantly. Dad froze completely, then shouted desperately, "What rent? Why?" The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. 22 pairs of eyes darted between my mother's suddenly pale face and my father's bewildered expression. Uncle Marcus set down his fork with deliberate precision, his lawyer instincts clearly sensing explosive revelations ahead. Cousin Jenny instinctively pulled her daughter closer, recognizing the shift from uncomfortable family tension to something far more serious. "What do you mean, rent?" Dad repeated, his voice cracking slightly. His weathered hands gripped the table edge as he stared at Patricia, searching her face for answers she clearly wasn't prepared to provide. Patricia's theatrical composure crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The wine glass trembled in her manicured fingers as she attempted damage control. "Irvin's being dramatic, Robert. You know how he exaggerates everything to get attention." I pulled out my phone with steady deliberation, opening the banking app I'd hoped never to reveal in such circumstances. 5 years of carefully hidden financial records glowed on the screen, each monthly transfer of $3,200, telling a story my family had never suspected. 5 years ago. I began my voice carrying across the now silent room. Mom and Dad received a foreclosure notice. The bank was 30 days away from seizing this house. Dad's face drained of color. "That's impossible. We refinanced the mortgage. The payments became manageable again." "No, Dad, you didn't refinance anything." I turned the phone screen toward him, displaying months of electronic transfers. "I've been paying your mortgage every single month since October 2018. Uncle Marcus leaned forward, his legal training evident in how quickly he processed the implications. "Irvin, are you saying your parents don't know you've been covering their housing costs?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Patricia's desperate laugh sounded hollow and forced. "This is ridiculous. Irvin works some little computer job from home. He couldn't possibly afford our mortgage payments." Cousin Jenny's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. "That's why you always downplayed his career, Aunt Patricia. You've been protecting some kind of secret." I hadn't planned to reveal the extent of my professional success, but the moment demanded complete transparency. I'm a senior software architect for 3 major tech companies. I work remotely managing cloud infrastructure for Fortune 500 corporations. My annual income exceeds $250,000. The admission struck the family like lightning. Aunt Sarah gasped audibly, Uncle Marcus's eyebrows shot skyward, and several cousins exchanged shocked glances. But Dad's reaction cut deepest. His face cycled through confusion, realization, and something approaching heartbreak. "But the mortgage company told us," he started, then stopped as pieces clicked together. "The representative said our loan had been restructured through a third-party payment service." "That third party was me," I confirmed. "I set up automatic payments to protect your credit rating and keep this house in the family." Patricia's panic intensified as her carefully constructed narrative collapsed. "You had no right to interfere in our financial business without permission." You had no right to call me useless in front of our entire family when I've been sacrificing $60,000 annually to keep you housed, I shot back. Jenny spoke up, her voice thoughtful. Aunt Patricia, I remember you complaining about Irvin's lack of ambition at last year's Christmas gathering. You said he was wasting his life playing video games. The hypocrisy was staggering. While I'd been working 80-hour weeks managing critical systems for companies that powered half the internet, my mother had been publicly humiliating me for my supposed failures. The emotional toll of maintaining this charade while enduring constant criticism had been crushing. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I knew it would devastate your pride, I replied honestly. You spent 40 years building a successful construction business before the economy crashed. I thought if I could handle things quietly until you recovered, nobody would have to know how bad things had gotten. Uncle Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Patricia, were you aware of Irvin's financial assistance this entire time? Her hesitation lasted a fraction too long. Of course I knew. I just didn't think it was anyone else's business. Then why? Jenny asked with growing suspicion. Have you spent 5 years publicly criticizing him for being unsuccessful? Patricia's wine glass finally slipped from her trembling fingers, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. This conversation is inappropriate for Thanksgiving dinner. But the dam had burst. Dad was studying my phone screen with growing comprehension, tracing the pattern of transfers that coincided perfectly with their mortgage payments resuming. His construction-calloused finger followed each transaction date, and I watched 20 years of marriage crumble in his eyes. Patricia, he said slowly, if Irvin has been paying our mortgage, where did you tell me the money was coming from? Her answer would change everything. I could see her calculating, desperate to find some explanation that wouldn't expose whatever deeper deception she'd been maintaining. The family waited in breathless anticipation as she opened her mouth to respond. That's when I pulled out the second piece of evidence that would shatter everything we thought we knew about our family. I swiped to another screen on my phone, revealing a different set of financial records that would expose the true scope of my mother's deception. But before I could speak, Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching horror. The retirement account, he whispered more to himself than anyone else. You said the stress went away because we were budgeting better. You said you'd found ways to make our money stretch further. Patricia's face went ashen. The scattered murmurs around the table died completely as family members sensed they were witnessing something beyond typical holiday drama. Uncle Marcus's legal instincts kicked into high gear. Robert, what about your retirement account? Dad's hands shook as he processed a terrible possibility. Patricia handles all our paperwork. She said our investments were doing well, that we had plenty saved for when I can't work construction anymore. When did you last see the actual statements? I asked, gently dreading the answer. She always said they came electronically now, that she was managing everything digitally to be more efficient. Dad turned toward Patricia with growing panic. Where are the statements, honey? Patricia's wine-stained napkin twisted in her white-knuckled grip. They're in the home office. This isn't the time or place for financial discussions. But Uncle Marcus was already standing. Actually, Patricia, I think this is exactly the time. Robert, do you mind if I take a look at those statements? I'll get them, Patricia said quickly, rising from her chair. No, Dad said firmly, something steely entering his voice. Marcus, please go look. Patricia, you stay here. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Uncle Marcus disappeared into the house while our extended family sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence. Children sensed the adult tension and grew restless. Cousin Jenny tried to maintain normalcy by serving dessert, but nobody had much appetite. When Uncle Marcus returned, his face was grim. He carried a manila folder and what appeared to be several months of unopened mail. Robert, I think you need to see this privately. No, Dad said with surprising firmness. If my son can reveal family financial business at this table, then I can face whatever you found. Show me." Uncle Marcus glanced apologetically at Patricia, then spread several documents across the cleared section of table. Bank statements, investment summaries, and credit card bills created a paper trail of devastating revelations. "Your retirement account has a current balance of $4,300, Uncle Marcus announced quietly. The silence was deafening. Dad stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible. We had almost 200,000 saved." According to these records, there have been consistent withdrawals over the past 3 years. Large amounts, sometimes 15 to 20,000 at a time. Patricia finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "There were medical expenses. Unexpected bills." "What medical expenses?" Dad demanded. "Neither of us has been seriously ill." Cousin Jenny leaned over to examine one of the credit card statements. Her sharp intake of breath drew everyone's attention. "Aunt Patricia, this shows regular charges at 3 different casinos, thousands of dollars monthly." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Dad stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Casinos. Patricia, you told me you were going to book club on Thursday nights. And spa days with the girls on weekends." Aunt Sarah added, her voice barely a whisper. "But these charges show you were gambling instead." The scope of the deception was staggering. While I'd been secretly paying their mortgage to keep them housed, Patricia had been systematically draining their retirement savings to fund a gambling addiction she'd hidden from everyone, including her husband. Uncle Marcus continued examining documents with professional thoroughness. "Robert, there's more. Several credit cards I don't think you know about, all in your name. The debt totals approximately $47,000. Dad looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I never applied for any credit cards." "The applications show your signature," Uncle Marcus said carefully, "but the spending pattern suggests someone else has been using them." Patricia's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Robert was depressed about losing the business. Irvin was never around, never called, never seemed to care about our struggles. I was working 16-hour days to pay your mortgage. I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I couldn't visit because I was sacrificing my entire social life to keep you from losing your home." "But you never told us," she shot back desperately. "How were we supposed to know you cared?" Cousin Jenny stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Aunt Patricia, that's manipulative garbage, and you know it. Irvin has been supporting you financially for 5 years, while you publicly humiliated him and secretly stole from Uncle Robert." The family dynamic had shifted completely. What started as Patricia's attempt to embarrass me had exposed her as the architect of our family's real problems. But I sensed there were still deeper layers to uncover. Uncle Marcus was studying one particular document with intense concentration. "Patricia, this withdrawal from the retirement account for $22,000 has a memo that says, 'Home improvement loan to neighbor.' Can you explain that?" Her silence stretched uncomfortably long. When she finally answered, her voice was so quiet we had to strain to hear. "Mrs. Henderson needed help with her roof repair." Dad's face went white. "You loaned our retirement money to a neighbor without discussing it with me. But I was already calling Mrs. Henderson, our 78-year-old neighbor who'd lived next door for 15 years. The phone conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it would change everything again. "Mrs. Henderson never received any loan," I announced to the stunned table. "But she does want to talk to Dad about some investment opportunity Patricia approached her about last month." The web of deception was unraveling faster than anyone could process. Patricia's gambling addiction was just the beginning. As we'd soon discover, she'd been running a far more sophisticated operation that would ultimately bring federal investigators to our door. Mrs. Henderson arrived at our front door within 15 minutes, clutching a manila envelope and wearing the determined expression of someone who'd been waiting years to tell an important truth. Dad invited her into the living room while our extended family remained clustered around the dining table, processing the avalanche of revelations. Robert, Mrs. Henderson began without preamble. Your wife has been telling people in the neighborhood that your son works for some big Silicon Valley company and that your family has special access to exclusive investment opportunities. Dad's face cycled through confusion and growing dread. What kind of investment opportunities? Mrs. Henderson opened her envelope, revealing professionally printed brochures and what appeared to be contracts. She said Irvin's Tech Connections could guarantee returns of 15 to 20% annually on special startup investments. She collected money from 12 families on our street. The blood drained from Dad's face. How much money? I gave her $8,000 last month, Mrs. Henderson admitted. The Johnsons across the street invested $15,000. The Martinez family put in their entire savings of $26,000. Uncle Marcus immediately shifted into lawyer mode. Mrs. Henderson, do you have documentation of these transactions? She handed over receipts and contracts bearing Patricia's signature, all using our family address as the business headquarters for something called Silicon Valley Connect Investment Services. The professional appearance of the documents suggested significant planning and premeditation. Where did you think the money was going? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Patricia said you personally recommended these startup companies through your work contacts. She showed us articles about your career and said family members got special access to pre-IPO investments. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Patricia had weaponized my legitimate career success to gain credibility for an elaborate fraud scheme targeting our elderly neighbors. The people I'd grown up around who'd watched me learn to ride a bike and graduate high school had trusted our family based on relationships spanning decades. Dad stood abruptly and headed for the stairs. I'm checking our home office right now. Robert, wait. Patricia called desperately, but he was already taking the steps 2 at a time. The sounds of drawers slamming and papers rustling filtered down from upstairs while we sat in uncomfortable silence. Uncle Marcus continued examining Mrs. Henderson's documents, his professional composure barely containing obvious alarm. Patricia, he said carefully, these contracts promise specific returns on specific dates. When investors start expecting their money back, what was your plan? She didn't answer, but her panicked expression suggested there had been no long-term plan beyond collecting as much money as possible. Dad's footsteps thundered back down the stairs. He burst into the living room carrying a cardboard box overflowing with papers, his face flushed with rage and betrayal. 27 families, he announced, his voice shaking. 27 signed contracts for investment services totaling over $400,000 in collected funds. The magnitude hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't gambling addiction or poor financial decisions. This was systematic fraud on a massive scale perpetrated against people who'd trusted our family for decades. Where's the money, Patricia? Dad demanded. Some of it was invested, she said weakly. In casinos, Cousin Jenny asked sarcastically. Uncle Marcus was already on his phone. I'm calling the district attorney's office. This is beyond family drama now. Wait, I said, my mind racing through implications. If Patricia used my name and career to gain credibility, I could be legally liable as an unwitting accomplice. The realization sent another chill through the room. Not only had my mother's actions devastated our family and defrauded our neighbors, but my own reputation and financial security were now at risk. Mrs. Henderson spoke up quietly. Irvin, dear, none of us blame you. Patricia was very clear that you didn't know about the investment opportunities. She said she was surprising you by helping your neighbors benefit from your success. But legal liability often didn't depend on intent or knowledge. If Patricia had promised returns based on my supposed involvement, I could face civil lawsuits regardless of my innocence. Dad continued digging through the box of documents, his face growing more ashen with each discovery. There are bank statements here showing transfers to accounts I've never seen before, and what looks like rental agreements for properties we don't own. Rental agreements. Uncle Marcus looked up from his phone call. Dad spread several lease documents across the coffee table. 3 different properties in 3 different states, all showing Patricia as the property owner, all generating monthly rental income. The depth of deception was staggering. While living in our family home and claiming financial stress, Patricia had been secretly acquiring rental properties with fraudulent investment funds, creating multiple streams of income none of us knew existed. Patricia finally broke down completely. "I was going to pay everyone back," she sobbed. "The rental income was supposed to generate enough money to cover the promised returns." "Using other people's life savings as unauthorized business loans," Uncle Marcus said grimly, "is called fraud. Federal fraud since you cross state lines." The sound of car doors slamming outside drew our attention. Through the front window, we could see 2 men in dark suits approaching our door. Uncle Marcus's call to the district attorney had apparently triggered an immediate response. "Those are federal agents," he said quietly. "Patricia, you need to understand that this situation has moved far beyond family problems. You're looking at potential prison time." As the doorbell rang, I realized that Thanksgiving dinner had been the least of our problems. We were about to become the subjects of a federal criminal investigation, and there was no telling where the evidence trail might lead. Dad answered the door with the dignity of a man who'd spent his life following the rules even as his world collapsed around him. "Officers, please come in. I think we have information you're going to want to see." Detective Wilson and Federal Agent Rodriguez introduced themselves with the calm professionalism of people accustomed to walking into family crises. Detective Wilson, a seasoned investigator with graying temples and kind eyes, immediately took control of the situation. "We received a call about potential investment fraud involving multiple victims," Detective Wilson explained. "We understand this is a difficult time for your family, but we need to gather information quickly to protect other potential victims." Agent Rodriguez, younger and more intense, focused immediately on the documents spread across our coffee table. "These contracts suggest interstate wire fraud, which brings this under federal jurisdiction." Patricia sat hunched in Dad's recliner, no longer the confident woman who'd humiliated me at dinner. Uncle Marcus had already explained his legal credentials and offered to facilitate the interview process. "Mrs. Patricia Hamilton." Agent Rodriguez began formally, "You have the right to remain silent. However, we're hoping you'll cooperate to help us understand the scope of this operation." The word operation sent chills through everyone present. This wasn't being treated as poor judgment or addiction-driven mistakes. Law enforcement clearly suspected something far more sophisticated. Detective Wilson opened a laptop and began documenting our statements. "Mr. Irvin Hamilton, we understand you work in technology and that your career may have been used to gain credibility for these investment schemes." I explained my legitimate employment history and emphasized my complete ignorance of Patricia's activities. "I work remotely and rarely discuss specific projects due to confidentiality agreements. I had no idea she was representing herself as having access to my professional connections. We'll need to verify your employment and review your financial records to establish your non-involvement," Agent Rodriguez noted. "This is standard procedure to protect you from potential charges." The agent spent 2 hours interviewing each family member separately. When they finished with Patricia, Detective Wilson's expression had grown considerably more grim. Based on preliminary information, he announced to our gathered family, "We're looking at potential victims in 4 states and fraud totaling approximately $800,000. The number hit like a physical blow. Dad actually staggered and had to sit down. $800,000 represented dozens of families' life savings, retirement funds, and emergency reserves. "How is that possible?" Cousin Jenny asked. Mrs. Henderson said the neighborhood investments totaled around $400,000. Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. "Mrs. Hamilton has admitted to running similar operations in 3 other communities where she previously lived. She's been moving every few years and targeting new groups of potential victims." The revelation transformed everything we thought we knew about Patricia's history. Her explanation for their previous relocations had always centered on Dad's construction work, requiring them to follow building projects. Now it appeared she'd been systematically defrauding communities and moving on before getting caught. The rental properties we found documents for, Detective Wilson continued, were purchased using victim funds. She's been operating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme using new investments to pay early returns while skimming money for personal expenses and asset acquisition. Uncle Marcus asked the question everyone was thinking. How long has this been going on? Based on bank records we've obtained through emergency warrants, Agent Rodriguez replied, approximately 8 years. Possibly longer. 8 years meant Patricia's criminal enterprise had been operating throughout most of my adult life. While I'd been building a legitimate career and eventually sacrificing my income to support what I thought was my parents' temporary financial crisis, my mother had been running a multi-state fraud operation. Detective Wilson's phone buzzed with an urgent call. After a brief conversation, he returned with news that would shatter any remaining illusions. We've just received reports from the Sacramento field office. Mrs. Hamilton apparently maintained residence in California under a different name and was operating a similar investment scheme there simultaneously. Different name? Dad asked weakly. Patricia Collins. Agent Rodriguez confirmed, complete with separate Social Security number, driver's license, and bank accounts. The scope of deception was beyond anything any of us had imagined. Patricia hadn't just been hiding a gambling addiction or even running a local fraud scheme. She'd been maintaining a double identity and operating criminal enterprises across multiple states simultaneously. Is any of our marriage even legal? Dad asked, his voice barely audible. That's something we'll need to investigate, Detective Wilson replied gently. Identity fraud complicates many legal relationships. As if the situation couldn't become more surreal, Agent Rodriguez received another call that would add yet another devastating layer to our family's disintegration. Airport security has detained a woman matching Mrs. Hamilton's description, attempting to board a flight to Las Vegas using a third identity, he announced after ending the call. Patricia Williams with a Nevada driver's license and what appears to be a significant amount of cash. Everyone turned to stare at Patricia, who'd been sitting silently throughout the investigation. She looked up with the defeated expression of someone whose elaborate house of cards had finally collapsed completely. How many identities do you have? Uncle Marcus asked in amazement. 3, she whispered. But I was going to come back. I just needed time to figure out how to make this right. Detective Wilson closed his laptop with finality. Mrs. Hamilton, you're under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate transportation of stolen funds. As they led Patricia away in handcuffs, Dad collapsed into his chair with the weight of 20 years of marriage revealed as an elaborate lie. The woman he'd loved and trusted had been systematically destroying lives while he slept beside her each night, completely unaware. But the investigation was far from over. As we'd soon discover, Patricia's arrest was just the beginning of a legal nightmare that would threaten everything our family had left. The days following Patricia's arrest blurred together in a haze of legal consultations, media attention, and devastating discoveries. Federal agents had seized all of our family's financial records, freezing accounts and placing holds on assets while they traced the flow of fraudulent funds. Dad spent 3 days in the hospital after suffering what doctors described as a stress-induced cardiac episode. The combination of betrayal, financial devastation, and public humiliation had pushed his 70-year-old heart beyond its limits. I sat beside his hospital bed watching machines monitor the rhythm of a life shattered by the woman he'd loved unconditionally. 23 years, he whispered during one of his lucid moments. How could I live with someone for 23 years and not know who she really was? Dr. Peterson, the cardiologist overseeing Dad's care, had seen stress-related heart attacks before, but admitted this case was extreme. Your father's heart is physically healthy for his age, she explained, but emotional trauma this severe can literally break hearts. He'll need months of recovery, both physical and psychological. Meanwhile, the legal complexities multiplied daily. Uncle Marcus had referred me to a criminal defense attorney, even though I hadn't been charged with any crimes. Attorney Sarah Mitchell specialized in white-collar crime and understood the potential liability facing unwitting accomplices to fraud schemes. The government has to prove you knowingly participated in the fraud, she explained during our first consultation. But civil liability is different. Victims can sue you regardless of criminal intent if they can demonstrate your reputation was used to gain their trust. The civil lawsuits began arriving within a week. Elderly neighbors who trusted our family name sought to recover their life savings from anyone associated with Patricia's crimes. The Martinez family had lost their entire retirement fund of $63,000. The Johnson family faced foreclosure on their home after investing $48,000 they'd planned to use for medical expenses. "I want to make this right," I told Sarah during one particularly difficult meeting. "These people trusted our family. They shouldn't suffer because of Patricia's crimes." "Admirable sentiment," Sarah replied, "but you're looking at potential liability exceeding $800,000. Even with your income taking full responsibility could bankrupt you and prevent you from supporting your father's recovery." The moral complexity was agonizing. These were people who'd watched me grow up, who'd trusted my family based on decades of neighborly relationships. But taking responsibility for Patricia's crimes would destroy my financial stability and eliminate my ability to care for Dad during his recovery. The media attention made everything worse. Local news stations covered the story as a shocking betrayal of community trust, featuring interviews with elderly victims who'd lost everything. My name and photo appeared alongside Patricia's in articles describing the sophisticated fraud scheme despite my status as an unwitting victim rather than a perpetrator. My tech industry reputation suffered immediate damage. Corporate clients became nervous about security clearances and background investigations. 2 major contracts were suspended pending resolution of the criminal case. The career I'd built over 15 years was crumbling due to crimes I'd had no knowledge of. Uncle Marcus tried to maintain family unity, but the stress was destroying relationships throughout our extended network. Cousin Jenny's husband blamed our family for bringing chaos into their lives and demanded she limit contact with us. Aunt Sarah faced neighborhood gossip suggesting she might have been involved in Patricia's schemes. The breakthrough came during the 3rd week of investigation, when forensic accountants uncovered Patricia's hidden assets. Agent Rodriguez called with news that would change everything. "We've located 3 safety deposit boxes registered under Patricia's various identities," he announced. "The contents include cash, jewelry, and documents relating to additional properties we didn't know about." The discovery led to a comprehensive asset recovery operation. Patricia had been far more sophisticated than anyone suspected, maintaining detailed records of every transaction while building a complex network of hidden resources. "She kept meticulous records," Detective Wilson explained, "almost like she was planning for eventual discovery and wanted to ensure she could remember where everything was hidden." The safety deposit boxes contained over $200,000 in cash, along with expensive jewelry purchased with fraudulent funds. But the real surprise was the discovery of cryptocurrency accounts that Patricia had been funding for years. Bitcoin purchases dating back to 2015, the forensic accountant reported. She was buying during early adoption periods when prices were much lower. Current value approaches $400,000. Even more shocking was the discovery that Patricia secretly owned not 3, but 7 rental properties across 4 states. The monthly rental income had been substantial, more than enough to pay promised returns to investors while funding her elaborate lifestyle. "Why didn't she just pay people back legitimately?" Dad asked during one of my hospital visits. The question haunted everyone involved in the investigation. Patricia had possessed the resources to operate a legitimate investment business, yet she'd chosen to maintain the fraudulent scheme for reasons that defied logical explanation. Federal prosecutors offered a plea agreement that would require Patricia to forfeit all hidden assets in exchange for a reduced sentence. The recovered funds would more than compensate every identified victim, with significant surplus remaining. But accepting the plea meant Patricia would spend the next 5 to 7 years in federal prison, effectively ending her marriage to Dad and destroying any chance of family reconciliation. "She's asking to speak with you," Detective Wilson informed me during a particularly difficult week. "She wants to explain why she did everything." The idea of visiting Patricia in federal detention felt surreal, but I needed answers to questions that were keeping me awake at night. How long had she been planning this? Had she ever loved Dad genuinely, or had their entire marriage been part of some larger deception? The conversation would provide answers I wasn't prepared to hear, and revelations that would fundamentally change how I understood my own life and family history. The federal detention center felt like stepping into another world. Gray concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of security systems created an atmosphere of institutional despair. Patricia sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, her voice lacking any trace of the theatrical confidence she'd displayed throughout my childhood. "I know you have every right to hate me." "I don't hate you," I replied honestly. "But I need to understand why you did this to our family." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Patricia explained that the fraud had begun small, almost accidentally, when neighbors asked about my tech career, and she'd embellished my success to impress them. When Mrs. Johnson mentioned wanting better investment returns, Patricia had impulsively claimed I had access to special opportunities. "I collected $5,000 from 3 families," she explained. "I told myself I'd invest it legitimately and pay them back with reasonable returns. But when the stock picks lost money, I panicked and used new investments to pay the promised returns." The classic Ponzi scheme progression had followed inevitably. Each lie required bigger lies to maintain. Each new victim provided temporary relief while creating larger future obligations. Within 2 years, she was maintaining false identities and operating across state lines to find new sources of funding. "Why didn't you stop when you had enough legitimate assets to pay everyone back?" I asked. Patricia's answer revealed the psychological complexity driving her crimes. "Because stopping meant admitting what I'd become. As long as I kept finding new investors, I could pretend I was just temporarily borrowing money to fund legitimate opportunities." The conversation also revealed the devastating impact of her deception on her relationship with Dad. She'd been living with the constant fear of discovery, maintaining elaborate lies about their finances, while watching his health deteriorate from stress she was secretly causing. "Your father is the most honest man I've ever known," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Every day I watched him worry about money I'd stolen, blame himself for our financial problems, and sacrifice his own needs to try to provide for our future. The guilt was destroying me, but I couldn't find a way to stop without losing everything." The irony was heartbreaking. Dad had been suffering from financial stress that was entirely artificial, created by the woman he loved, while she possessed the resources to eliminate his worries completely. But the most shocking revelation came when Patricia explained the extent of her hidden assets. The forensic accountants had found most of her resources, but there were additional properties and accounts they hadn't discovered. "I own a small apartment building in Phoenix that generates $8,000 monthly in rental income," she admitted. "And there's a business investment account with nearly $200,000 that I never reported." The total value of Patricia's hidden assets exceeded $1.2 million. She had been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise while possessing legitimate wealth that could have supported our family comfortably without any fraud whatsoever. "I could have lived honestly," she said with devastating clarity. "I had enough legitimate income to support Robert and myself, pay for his medical care, and even help you with your career. But I was addicted to the complexity, the secret knowledge, the feeling of controlling multiple identities and operations." The admission revealed that her crimes weren't driven by financial desperation or even gambling addiction. She had been addicted to deception itself, to the psychological thrill of maintaining elaborate lies while presenting herself as a loving wife and mother. Federal prosecutors confirmed that Patricia's full cooperation and asset forfeiture would provide complete restitution to all identified victims, plus additional compensation for their suffering. The recovered funds would total over $1.4 million, ensuring every investor received their principal back plus substantial interest. But the legal implications extended beyond victim compensation. My cooperation with the investigation had impressed federal agents and prosecutors who recognized that I'd been sacrificing my own financial security to support what I believed was my parents' legitimate financial crisis. Mr. Hamilton's character has been exemplary throughout this investigation. Agent Rodriguez stated in his official report, his willingness to accept financial responsibility for crimes he didn't commit demonstrates the kind of integrity we rarely see in white-collar cases. The character references from federal law enforcement helped restore my professional reputation. Corporate clients who'd suspended contracts began reaching out to discuss resumed relationships. The security clearance issues that had threatened my career were resolved when the FBI issued official documentation of my non-involvement in cooperation. 3 months after Patricia's arrest, the plea agreement was finalized. She would serve 6 years in federal prison, forfeit all hidden assets, and never be permitted to manage investments or financial services again. The sentence was severe, but fair, reflecting both the magnitude of her crimes and her complete cooperation in recovery efforts. Dad was released from the hospital after 5 weeks of cardiac rehabilitation. The doctors were amazed by his physical recovery, but noted that emotional healing would take much longer. Learning that your life partner has been living a complete lie is one of the most severe forms of psychological trauma, Dr. Peterson explained. Robert will need extensive counseling to process not just the betrayal, but the question of whether anything in his marriage was genuine. The family relationships that had been damaged during the investigation began slowly healing. Uncle Marcus apologized for initially suspecting I might have been involved in Patricia's schemes. Cousin Jenny's marriage strengthened when her husband recognized how my integrity under pressure had protected our entire family from association with Patricia's crimes. Even more remarkably, the elderly neighbors who'd lost money in Patricia's schemes began reaching out to express support rather than blame. Mrs. Henderson visited Dad regularly during his recovery, bringing homemade meals and companionship during his darkest moments. "Your son saved our community," she told him repeatedly. By taking responsibility and cooperating with the investigation, he ensured we all got our money back. "We know none of this was your family's fault." The media narrative gradually shifted from scandal to redemption. Local news stations covered the victim restitution process, highlighting how my cooperation had led to full recovery of stolen funds. My employer issued public statements supporting my integrity and character. But the most meaningful moment came when Dad was finally strong enough to visit Patricia in prison. Their conversation lasted 3 hours and resulted in both closure and forgiveness that would allow him to move forward with his life. "I'm filing for divorce," he told me afterward. But I also told her I forgive her. She's sick in ways we never understood, and holding anger will only hurt my own recovery. The legal nightmare was finally ending, but our family's real healing was just beginning. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our family home preparing Thanksgiving dinner for a gathering that bore no resemblance to the previous year's devastating confrontation. Dad hummed quietly while carving turkey, his color healthy and his movements confident. The cardiac rehabilitation had been successful, but more importantly, he'd found peace with the truth about his marriage and his future. 32 people confirmed their coming, announced Sarah Chen, my girlfriend of 8 months, as she coordinated side dishes with military precision. Sarah had been the FBI victim advocate assigned to our case, and somewhere between helping elderly neighbors recover their life savings and supporting Dad through his health crisis, we'd discovered a connection neither of us had expected. The guest list represented a complete transformation of our family dynamics. Mrs. Henderson arrived early with her famous stuffing recipe, followed by the Martinez family bearing homemade tamales. The Johnson family brought their grandchildren, who immediately claimed the living room for video games. Rather than the competitive status updates that had characterized previous family gatherings, our table now included people whose lives had been genuinely impacted by our family's integrity under pressure. Uncle Marcus pulled me aside before dinner to share news that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "The law practice wants to offer you a consulting position helping clients understand technology-related fraud protection. Your experience and technical expertise would be invaluable." The opportunity represented something I'd never considered: using my technical skills to help protect people, rather than simply managing corporate systems. The work would involve educating small businesses and individuals about financial security, drawing on lessons learned from Patricia's sophisticated schemes. We've also been contacted by the FBI about potential consulting work, Uncle Marcus continued. They're developing training programs to help agents understand modern fraud techniques. Your unique perspective as both a technology expert and an unwitting victim could help them protect other families. The federal consulting opportunity felt like completing a circle. The investigation that had threatened to destroy my career was now opening doors to work that could prevent other families from experiencing similar devastation. Cousin Jenny approached with her daughter, who shyly presented me with a hand-drawn thank you card. "For helping Grandpa Robert feel better," the 5-year-old explained with the profound simplicity that only children possess. The card joined a collection of similar expressions from throughout the community. Neighbors had sent thank you notes, baked goods, and invitations to local events, transforming me from the family embarrassment Patricia had portrayed into someone genuinely valued by the people around us. Dad called everyone to the table with none of the tension that had characterized previous holiday gatherings. His toast was simple but powerful, to family defined by character rather than blood, and to second chances that help us become better than we were. The dinner conversation flowed naturally between updates on community recovery, shared memories of positive family experiences, and plans for future gatherings. Mrs. Henderson described how the victim support group had evolved into a general senior advocacy organization. The Martinez family shared news about their son's college scholarship made possible by the investment funds they'd recovered. After dinner, Dad and I walked through our neighborhood, greeting people who waved from porches and sidewalks. The community that had once known us primarily as Patricia's family now recognized us for our own actions and character. "I need to tell you something I've never said properly," Dad began as we reached the park where I'd learned to throw a baseball. "I'm proud of the man you've become. Not because of your career success or your financial sacrifices, but because of how you handled the worst situation our family has ever faced." The words carried weight that years of career achievements had never provided. Dad's respect meant more than any professional recognition or financial milestone. "Patricia will be eligible for parole in 4 years, he continued. "I've been thinking about whether I'll maintain any relationship with her." The question had been weighing on all of us. Patricia's letters from prison showed genuine remorse and participation in counseling programs, but forgiveness didn't necessarily require ongoing relationship. "That's your decision to make," I replied, "but whatever you choose, I'll support you." We walked in comfortable silence, processing how completely our lives had changed. The house that had nearly been lost to foreclosure was now mortgage-free, purchased outright with funds recovered from Patricia's hidden assets. Dad's retirement was secure. His health was stable, and his future was filled with genuine relationships built on honesty rather than deception. Sarah joined us on the front porch as evening settled over our neighborhood. Her work with victim advocacy had inspired her to pursue additional training in financial crime prevention, and she'd been accepted to a master's program that would enhance her ability to help families navigate similar crises. "I have news I wanted to share with both of you," she announced with barely contained excitement. "The Justice Department has approved funding for a national victim assistance program based on what we learned from your case. They want me to direct it." The program would provide resources and support for families affected by financial fraud, helping them navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges we'd experienced. Sarah's leadership would ensure that other families wouldn't face their darkest moments alone. As we sat together watching neighbors tend their gardens and children play in the street, I reflected on the profound lessons the past year had taught us. Character reveals itself in crisis. Authentic relationships survive truth, while false ones crumble under honest scrutiny. And sometimes the worst betrayals clear space for the most meaningful connections. Dad broke the peaceful silence with a question that had become his signature phrase during recovery. "So what's the most important thing you've learned?" It was a ritual he'd developed in counseling, forcing himself to articulate growth and wisdom rather than dwelling on pain and betrayal. Tonight, my answer came easily. That love without honesty isn't really love at all. Patricia claimed to love us while systematically lying about everything that mattered. But the people around this table tonight care about us enough to tell us difficult truths and support us through genuine challenges. Sarah squeezed my hand, her presence representing exactly the kind of authentic relationship that had emerged from our family's darkest period. Dad nodded approvingly, his own journey toward emotional healing reflected in his ability to find wisdom rather than bitterness in our experiences. The neighborhood settled into evening quiet porch lights, creating warm circles of illumination that connected home to home like a network of community support. Our family had been tested by deception and betrayal that could have destroyed everything we valued. Instead, we'd discovered strengths and relationships that made us more resilient than we'd ever been alone. 12 months after the Thanksgiving dinner that shattered our illusions, we'd built something far more valuable, a life based on truth, relationships grounded in genuine care, and the deep satisfaction that comes from choosing integrity even when it's painful. Patricia's question echoed in my memory. How does it feel to be useless, son? Now I knew the answer with complete certainty. It feels incredible to be useful to people who matter, to contribute meaningfully to lives you genuinely care about, and to build relationships strong enough to survive any truth. The evening ended with plans for next year's gathering, community service projects we wanted to support, and quiet confidence that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them with honesty together. Before we head inside, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? How did you handle learning difficult truths about people you trusted? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else navigating a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in truth. Share this with anyone who might need reminding that character reveals itself in crisis and that authentic relationships are always worth the pain of discovering the false ones. Thank you for listening to our family's journey from deception to healing. I hope you'll remember that even in our darkest moments, choosing integrity over convenience creates space for relationships and happiness we never imagined possible. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who matter most to you.